Silectis Magpie helps you get up and running quickly with your data lake. And here we're going to dive into a quick demo of some of the key capabilities of Magpie using a hypothetical real estate client called XYZ Real Estate. And what they want to do is use a data-driven method to help a potential client assess where to put a new hotel in New York City. And they're going to use a couple different data sets that they're going to join together in Magpie to do that. So first, they're going to use some Airbnb listing data to assess relative price of hotel rooms in different New York City neighborhoods. They're also going to use taxi data from the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission to assess popularity of different neighborhoods. And by joining those two things together, they're going to get an idea of where they should be looking to place their new hotel. Then they're going to use New York City Department of Finance and Department of Buildings data to assess particular target locations within that area to place their hotel. And they're going to do all this within Silectis Magpie and build a data lake for ongoing use in their organization. This demo is going to be in 3 parts. And the first is a rapid analysis phase, where we're going to load in that data quickly and quickly identify those target properties that might be of value to purchase for this new hotel. The second part is about building an ongoing process on top of this data lake within Magpie, and we're going to show how you can build recurring tasks to keep your data lake up to date. Part 3 is about governance and showing how you can secure your data lake and audit and monitor activity within your data lake to get insight about how your business is using data. And now you're seeing Silectis Magpie. This is a notebook interface similar to Jupyter or Apache Zeppelin. And what you'll see here is a series of paragraphs where we're doing data engineering, data analysis, ETL work inside of Magpie. And each one of these paragraphs is using a different language, and we can mix and match these different languages as we go through the tasks based on what's the right tool for the job. So you'll see a number of different languages here as we go through. The first is Markdown, and we're using this to document what we're doing in the notebook. And this is useful if you're working across a team and you want to share notebooks between different people on the team. It's a good way to document, what you're doing in the notebook and what the purpose of the notebook is. The other language that you'll see a lot is our custom Magpie script. And this is a domain-specific language that we've built to do data engineering ETL work inside of Magpie. It has a lot of short-circuit operations that make tasks a lot easier to do. You'll also see SQL, and that's what we use to query data within Magpie. And also available are Python and Scala, and you can use those to dive a little deeper and do more custom actions if you need to. And so here we'll just start off by loading in some rental data from Airbnb listings. And this is what the client is going to use to assess the potential price of rooms in the different New York City neighborhoods when they're trying to figure out where to build their hotel. So first, we're going to use Magpie script to create a new data source. And this is a pointer to a Redshift warehouse where this listing data lives. And we use this to specify the connection information to go out and talk to that Redshift database. So here we're using this Magpie create schema command to load in the metadata from this Redshift warehouse into Magpie. And so this is saying, here are all the tables that Magpie found in this database, and it reads the fields from those and creates Magpie tables so we can reach out and talk to Redshift from within Magpie. One of the useful features of Magpie is profiling, and this helps you understand quickly what the content of your data is when you've just loaded it in or you're just getting familiar with a new data set. And so here, this is a schema profile of this Airbnb listing schema we just loaded in. And so this shows you how many tables there are, what the tables are, how many fields are in each table. It looks like a lot of data in this, this listings table, a lot of fields. How many rows are in each table? And then for fields within that table, what are the earliest and latest timestamps that were found in that table? And that helps you understand, how often are each of these tables being used? When were they first used? When were they last used? So here we can show a couple rows from that listings table. And this is reaching out to the Redshift database and connecting to it and pulling back the rows to view within Magpie. And so you can scroll through and preview this, this information from within Magpie. So great, we have reached out and connected to that Airbnb listing data. Now we're gonna pull in the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission data. And this is going to help us understand relative popularity of neighborhoods within New York City. And so here we're using Magpie to create a data source, just like we did for the Airbnb listings Redshift data. Here, this is an HDFS-like file system. It's an S3 bucket, and we're specifying what the bucket name is and where the data lives within that bucket. So here we're able to, again, use Magpie script to create tables directly from that data source. And in this case, we're creating them from files within that data source. And these are actually folders within that file system. And there are a number of files within each of these folders, but Magpie is able to union all those together into one table for you. And so we have yellow taxi data, for hire vehicle data, that's things like black cars, Ubers, Lyfts, taxi zones, and some aggregate data as well. So just like we profiled the schema, Magpie is able to profile tables. And this is a bit more detailed data than the schema profile. This is looking at the content of the data. And so for each of the fields within that yellow cab data table, it's showing what the type of that field is, whether it's a categorical variable, whether it's numerical data, whether it's a timestamp, and how many null and distinct values exist in each of those fields. For each of those fields, we can dive down and understand a little bit more detailed information about that field. So for this timestamp, we can see how that data is distributed by day of year. And we can see some things that make sense here, around holidays. The taxi pickups, get less. And additionally, it looks like taxis are a bit more popular midweek than on Sundays and Mondays. We can also see, taxi pickups increase throughout the morning commute, stay steady throughout the day, and then, pick up again in the evening when people are leaving work and going out. And so this is just a way to quickly understand the content of your data before you dive into analysis. And it also helps you spot check, make sure everything was loaded in correctly. Magpie also allows you to describe each of the metadata objects that it tracks. And this is useful because here, we're describing this yellow trip data table, and Magpie is able to show the most recent profile that was run on that table. And you can interrogate that. So you don't have to keep rerunning that profile if you want to see what the profile told you. And this is also useful if one person runs a profile, the rest of the team that has access to this data also has that profile. And so you can benefit from your colleagues' work much more easily. So here we're going to dive into some SQL. And now that we have both the Airbnb listings data and the New York City taxi data loaded in, we can run a query to join those two together. And this is doing a federated query from Redshift to that S3 bucket. And it's joining that data together to try to identify what the most popular locations are based on hotel room price or Airbnb listing price. And so here you see on the y-axis, this is the number of drop-offs in a particular taxi zone. And on the x-axis, this is the average price of Airbnb listings in that zone. And here you can dive in and filter out different boroughs if you want. But here we're just interested in all of New York City. And so we can see that in this case, if the client is interested in hotel rooms between $200 and $250 a night, then maybe they want to consider this particular taxi zone because it seems to be the most popular in terms of taxi drop-offs. And that happens to be the Murray Hill area. So great, now that we've identified that taxi zone as our potential target, what we can do is run this create table from URL command to load in data from the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. From this URL, it serves up CSV data, and you may have seen that an error came up the first time we ran it. This API is a little spotty, but that's okay. Magpie shows you that you got an error when you tried to do it the first time, and now it's trying again. And so what we're specifying here is, hey, this data has a header, and you should try to infer the schema of this data based on the content of it. And this is a great way that Magpie allows you to integrate external third-party data into your data lake very quickly. And this is one of the differences of a data lake to a data warehouse. And so, okay, great. This time when we ran that connection, it was able to connect fine, and it pulled in the data from the URL. And so now we have that data. We can describe the table and see, all right, what are all the fields in there? And you can see the persistence mapping. It was saved in our S3 file system. And so now what we're going to do is again run a SQL query to dig into that data and try to find specific target properties in that Murray Hill area that we identified above. So we can filter based on the block, and these Manhattan blocks correspond to that Murray Hill area. We want to make sure it has enough lot space for our hotel, and we want to make sure the assessed total value is within the customer's budget. And so here we have identified 37 potential target properties, and then within Magpie we can just save that most recent SQL result as a new table. And so now the client has that. They can refer to that in the future. They can share it across their team. So that's the end of part one of the demo, kind of our rapid analysis portion where we're loading in data quickly and quickly getting some value. So part two is about creating a recurring process surrounding this. And Magpie helps with that as well. So let's say that this client isn't ready to pull the trigger on any of those properties yet. What they want to do is monitor this area for activity of other developers. And so they want to look at New York City Department of Buildings building permit data. And what we can do within Magpie is use Magpie script to create a simple job that is going to use that create table from URL command to pull in data from the city of New York, drop the existing table and save the new data as the updated table, and then it's going to run a profile in the second task on that data. So when analysts come in and want to use this, they have a fresh profile of the data. And once you create a job within Magpie, you can either execute it in line or you can schedule it for future execution. And I should mention that here we're just creating two Magpie script tasks. Just like you can use different languages in the various paragraphs in the notebook, you can use different languages for tasks within Magpie jobs. So you can do Magpie script, Python script, Scala script, and also SQL mapper tasks. And that allows you, again, to use the right tool for the job when you're creating jobs. And so once you have a job, you can execute it in line, or you can schedule it to run periodically. And here we're just creating a daily schedule using some simple cron syntax to schedule that to run, every morning on the server. And then we can also create a notification subscription for that schedule. And so here we're going to get an email sent to us when that job fails. And there are a number of different triggers and channels that you can configure to get notified the right way at the right time. And then just like you can describe tables, you can describe jobs within Magpie. And so this is going to show you that, hey, here are the tasks within that job. Here are my 2 scripts that are running. And then here's when it's scheduled to run. Additionally, within Magpie, you can query the execution history of a job. And this allows you to dig into, what are all the previous runs of this job? Did they succeed or fail? How long did they take? And for each particular execution, you can dig in and say, how long did each of the tasks take? What log messages were written? And this is a way, in addition to that notification feature, to understand how jobs are running on your Magpie data lake. And so that's part 2 of the demo, that recurring process piece. Part 3 is about security and audit logging, that governance piece that Magpie provides. So here, let's say that our client wants to have the analysis team get access to Magpie and start doing some analysis within Magpie. So we can create a schema for them as a sandbox schema to save their tables and work on their analysis. Then we can create a role and grant some permissions on that role for the analysis team. So we're going to give them read access to the Airbnb schema, read access to the New York City data schema, and create access on their sandbox schema. And then we're going to grant that role to a hypothetical user. And so then, again, we can describe any metadata object within Magpie. And so we can see here what are the details of that role. Who are the members? What permissions do they have? So now that we have that role configured and all of our data in the data lake, we can use Magpie to understand how people are using the data. What are people in the organization doing with this data lake? And so there are 2 ways you can do that. One is through this activity history command. And what this is doing is showing you the 50 most recent commands that were run within your organization, within this XYZ real estate organization. And for each one of these commands, you can dig in and see details about that. So for the SQL query, you can see, oh, yep, there's the SQL that I ran to understand what my potential target properties are, and I needed use permission on the New York City data schema to do that, and I also needed read permission on the tax records table. And so all of those are saved in there, including when tasks did not succeed, like when that create table from URL failed the first time. We record that as a failure and allow you to query those as well. So here, we can also do what's called a usage history command. And that is looking at the metadata level to understand how a specific metadata object or tree of objects has been used. And so here we're looking at when was the Airbnb listings data used and when were any of its child objects used. And so here are the 5 times that we used that particular schema since I created it at the beginning of this demo. And again, we can look at any of these and see which metadata objects were touched. And so here's that SQL query that I ran to identify the Murray Hill neighborhood, all the tables that it needed to touch, and all that is available within Magpie and queryable. And so that's the end of our demo for now. I hope this gave you an idea of how Magpie can get you up and running quickly with the data lake and provides this crucial management layer on top of the data lake to help you succeed with your data engineering and data analysis tasks.